Okay, I just passed you the control.
Oh, that's true. It's displaying fine. It's just got that dialogue in it. So in the room, we are seeing the slides, but with a dialogue in front. We have meet echo in chat yet? Sorry? Is there meet echo in chat here? Should be, right? They usually are. I don't see them yet. Yeah, I don't see them yet. No. Click on that. This? No, one to the left. Okay, it was highlighted. Presentation view. Okay. Check. Note taking tool. Settings. Anything under settings? Okay. Settings. It's all correct. Okay. Close. Change devices? No. Test local speakers? No. Why don't you try unsharing the slides and reshare them and see what happens? Now we're there. Okay. Okay. It's still there though. So somebody has a poll up, so maybe we can try canceling the poll. Just give us a couple of minutes to resolve this. There's a poll window, I believe, open, which is causing to overlay on the slide deck. Show hands to. Oh, see, that's the one. Yep, whatever you just did. What did you do? Yeah,
I just killed the poll.
Okay, I think that fixed it. You're good. So Kent, I'm going to pass the presentation ball back to you. All right, with those few glitches away, this is the NetConf working group meeting in IETF114. Next slide, please. Okay, that's a note. Well, most of you are familiar with it. If you're not, do take some time to go through it. Anything you speak or discuss within the halls of this meeting are part of the IETF contributions. Next slide. So a couple of additions or changes. So we, of course, have the Meet Echo session. You're here, you know that. You should be logged into the Meet Echo session, whether in person, like the version that you're probably running if you're in the room, or if you're remote, then you have a full version with the house icon. The Meet Echo session will also act as a virtual blue sheet. So if you're logged in, it'll record you as an attendee to the session. There is a chat window. I think for the first time, we are introducing Zulip. So monitor some of the chats on that session. Jabber comments, of course, will be reflected within the Zulip session. We have a 2-hour slot, and we have not a completely packed agenda, so we'll probably be a little flexible with time, but we'll try to use the timer if necessary. The queue will be managed by Meet Echo. So whether you are in the room or remote, do try to line up in the queue session before you speak. So to queue up, use the icon with the hand symbol on the, and then to speak, make sure that you have hit the play button. This is for the remote audience. And of course, remember to remove yourself from the queue once you're done talking. There is a note session with, I believe the agenda has been preloaded. We'd welcome your comments or contributions to that notes page. So please add that. Add your notes or your comments to that page. You can right click to make it a separate window if need be. Next slide, please. All right, so the status of the chartered workgroup items, the HTTPS node of draft, the Shepherd has written up on the document. Thanks, Markifound. We published -11 and there should be a -12 soon that we will publish that should address the comments we received in the Shepherd's write-up. The client server suite of drafts, all the working group last comments issues were resolved. And at this time, the documents are ready for write-up, which is something I'll be working on. We are, of course, looking for volunteers to help in writing. There are a total of 9 documents. And if anyone is willing and wants to do a Shepherd write-up, please do approach me. The UDP node of draft is work in progress, will be discussed in this meeting. And so will the distributed node of draft. The adaptive subscription draft was adopted as an experimental draft. So it's been marked in as work in progress, but is not being discussed in this meeting. Next slide, please. All right, so on the agenda under chartered items, we have Alex, who's going to discuss both the UDP and the distributed node of draft. And then we have Chen, who will talk about the newly adopted list pagination drafts. Next slide, please. Under non-chartered items, we have continuation of the discussion on the transaction ID. Jan will present that. And then we have a new draft in the form of NetConf over quick. And as that will be followed by Sean Turner, who will give an update on NetConf over TLS 1.3. And for the remaining time, we'll have a discussion around NetConf and Rascon next. So any questions, concerns, anything you want to raise at this point? All right. Nothing in the room, and I don't see anyone in the queue, so maybe we can switch to the first slide deck. And Alex.
I come there.
Sorry. Yeah, stay. Right.
So, sorry. Do you listen to me?
No. Okay. Let's turn it on.
Thank you. Hello. Hello to everyone. This is Alex Wan from Insalion, and on behalf of the authors, I'll be presenting a little update on the UDP notice draft. So next slide, please. On the agenda today, I will present a little context on this draft, the two changes, the two drafts we did to address the last IETF comments, and the plan changes for the upcoming versions of this draft. So next slide, please. So UDP Notif is a UDP-based transport protocol for Young Push. The notification message is outside of the scope of this draft. And for that, we propose a shim header to send information directly from the line card without impacting the router, the performance of the router. Next slide, please. So this protocol is designed to be deployed on secure networks, but for unsecure networks, a DTLS layer is proposed on section 6. Next slide, please. And on the last IETF 113, we received 2 comments from the working group chairs. Thank you very much for that. The first one is that how can we configure this DTLS layer for this transport protocol? And the second one, that it would be better to add some examples of these configurations files for NetConf. Next slide, please. To address that, between the -05 and the -06, globally we updated. The biggest change is the Young model and the Young module to address the first request. So what we see here is that we added a new flag to enable DTLS or disable it, and then the DTLS container to set up the DTLS layer parameters. This DTLS container imports actually the TLS client server draft grouping. And right now we do believe that we have everything we need to configure it, but we're still waiting for the implementation to check that. Next slide, please. Also, reviewing the Young module, we added 2 missed features, one for DTLS and one for segmentation. We renamed also the global grouping name to UDP receiver grouping and made the port mandatory since there is no default YANA port anymore. Next slide, please. We did some rephrasing on the max segment size leaf to include the options octets on this leaf. And then lastly, the flag for enabling DTLS layer and the container with the DTLS parameters. Next slide, please. We had one last request that it is to update the shim header version to allow the collector receive different versions of UDP Notif. The one before it became a working group document and the current one. So we address that by updating it. Next slide, please. And then since we haven't still checked on this YAM module, we did not address yet the examples, but it's planned on our timeline to implement these examples and test it before put it on the draft. Next slide, please. So yes, that's it for the UDP notif. And if you had any questions, the feedback is welcome. Yes, go ahead, Kent.
Yes. On slide 8, you showed enable DTLS Boolean flag, and then immediately underneath it, the container for the DTLS configuration. I think better would be to make the container be a presence container and remove the enable DTLS Boolean leaf.
So, okay, so putting the leaf inside a DTLS container, what you're asking, right?
No, not putting the leaf inside, removing the leaf, and instead making the container be a presence container. So you add a descendant node called presence.
Okay, I see. Okay.
Benoit?
Hello, Alex. So I'm Benoit Claes. So I was reading your slide about secure networks, and then I was reading your security consideration. And just editorially, you could be adding a reference to an RFC that I like, which is about limited domains and internet protocols. This RFC 8799. I'll be sending an email that explains why we need to make a distinction between something which is in a control domain and something which is over the wild.
Okay, we'll do that.
All right. Just one more.
So Rob Wilson, Cisco. So just a quick question on the version change. Could you just explain again why that's being done? So when you want this to go to RFC, is the intention that you ship it with version 1 or you go back to version 0? I didn't quite understand.
No, what we would like is to the RFC version would be the last version on the draft, actually. So it's to allow the collector to collect the older versions of this already implemented draft.
Okay. So is this an IANA managed registry for these version numbers? How's that managed?
Right now, I believe it's only on the draft. There is no YANA on there, but
so I think it would be helpful to add a section on IANA consideration section if there isn't one that says that there'll be a registry set up to manage those version numbers. If certainly you can have a version that's shipped or effectively deployed already that's reserved, I think that would be quite helpful.
Okay.
Okay, I guess we can move to distributed notif.
Yeah, so also on behalf of the authors, just a quick update on the last draft they published. The next slide, there's one only. So it hasn't any change on this draft, actually. There are some corrected needs on the last version. And the authors, they believe that it is already really stable, but that since the only reference to this draft is UDP notif, they would like to wait for the UDP notif to be last called before last calling this one. And that would be it.
All right. speaking as a contributor, did you get, and probably this applies more to your previous draft actually. So did you get a chance to discuss with Sean Turner on the DTLS container for UDP Nordic?
Not yet, and we will do that during the week of the IETF.
Okay. Following that question would be, considering that this is a security feature, I guess we need to send the draft for a sector review. So could you let us know when the document is ready for a sector review?
Okay, I will do that.
All right. Thanks, Alex.
Okay. Yeah, good morning, everyone. Yeah, my name is Qing. Good morning. This is Qing. I want to talk about the list pagination mechanism for NetConf and Rascon. So here we have three relevant jobs that has just been adopted. Actually, the name we list here are the author of this job. We actually formed the design team. So this is not the first to present this job. So I just want to give
Closer to
the update of what we are doing, what this job is about. Next. So first, the motivation and the goal, actually, what we propose is list pagination mechanism. So traditional, we use traditional use NetConf protocol like operation like get or get configure to do the data retrieval. But when you face in large amount of data retrieval, actually, especially applied to the list or leaf list, from server side, you may take a long time to send this kind of data. When the interface between the, for example, NetConf client and the NetConf server, they have bandwidth constraint or resource constraint. So this kind of latency will you feel by the client will be even worse. So from the client side, actually, they may need to consume more resource to interpret this kind of data. So our idea is, to borrow some concept from circular S statement when you use to query some database, so you can actually integrate the backend system in the server, so you can use some kind of index mechanism to faster locate the data. So this is the motivation for this worker, try to quickly to query or locate the data using index mechanism. Next. So we have three relevant drafts. Actually, these three drafts actually related to each other. Actually, the first one is list pagination mechanism, try to provide a generic mechanism, and this can provide you to do the filtering or to do the sorting and the retrieval. Actually, this is most applied to this list or leaf list. And we also provide the NetConf protocol extension and the Rascon protocol extension. So this, the other two actually use the first generic mechanism as a basis. Next. So first I want to introduce the list pagination mechanism draft. So in this draft, actually we define 6 query parameters. So as we clarified, actually we try to borrow concept from the circular statements that are used in the database query. Actually, for example, select where this kind semantics, actually, we introduce similar semantics. Here, for example, where this you can see this as a selection filter. It can help you to filter your interested result set, and sort by. You can see this actually is kind of index node. Actually, you can use this index node to quickly, locate the results set entries. And also we have direction to give you, when you do the search or get a result back, you need to know what is the order. It could be dissident order or ascending order. And offset, actually, it allow you, not from the first entry, actually you can skip a several entry, start from there and do the further query. And limit will tell you how many entry you can return. In addition, actually, we introduced sublist limit. This kind of parameter, this actually, different from the limit parameter. Actually, they only apply to child list or child live list. So they can help you to return the number of entry in the child list or live list. So we also, provide a server processing order. The first, you need to process where, and then you process sort by, direction, offset, and limit. And also, we actually introduce metadata attribute, and we call it remaining. So the idea is, this remaining parameter we'll use together with the limit or sublist limit. Actually, it will tell you when you do the query, you may need to know how many entry are left in the result entry, result set, actually. So remaining will tell you this kind of information. Next. So here we'll give the example. As we present, actually, we have 6 current parameters. We use a combination of these 6 parameters in the request response to guide how list and live list can be returned. Actually, we have a draft, actually, this, the draft, you can see the appendix, they have example module. So they will tell you the schema. So in the left, actually, in the request that we actually focus on specific list that we call the member. So the member is defined as the list. Actually, it under the members container. So we use where to do the selection filter, and sort by. You can see this, as the index node. So member ID is the index node, actually. So we also set direction, actually, is kind of dissident order and offset. So you start from second entry, and then you the limit will tell you, from the second entry you will get two entries. So start from second and 3. So this 2 entry. So you can see that it's kind of example. Next. So for remaining, actually, as we clarify, actually, it apply to the dissident list or live list. So we give an example to compare. When we use remaining, when you use a sublist limiter, or when you not use a sublist limiter, with a sublist limiter set onset, actually, you can see, actually, you can return the whole results. Actually, it will return the total entry in the result set. But when you set a sublimit parameter, for example, you set a sublimit parameter 1, actually, you only return 1 entry. But they also tell you, for example, the total you have 5 entry, and you return 1 entry. The remaining one is 4 entry. So it will. So this remaining will tell you how many entry are left in the result set. Next. We also define the server list pagination constraint discovery. This is the most actually only applied to the config false list or leaf list, since interaction with their content may be limited. So you can see actually we augment from the system capability module, which has already the RFC. And we introduced two parameters. One is constraint, the second indexed. The constraint will tell you which config false node are constraint. Actually, index actually, is used together with constraint. When you set a constraint, and you can say, it will tell you which node can be used in the where or sorted by the expression. So here we give the example. In addition, for this constraint discovery, actually we allow more extensibility for constraint parameter. So you can add besides the constraint and index two parameter, we can introduce some other parameters. So we'll give some example. For example, you may be not support 100% XPath 1.0 syntax. So you can add some other parameter here. Yeah, next. So second job is a NETCONF protocol extension. Next. So in this job, actually we provide two extensions. The first is we augment the three NETCONF RPC statements. Get and get config and get data. And also we align with list pagination job for query parameter. You can see all these query parameter actually has been put here actually to try to align with the list pagination mechanism job. Next. So we give the example of how it looks like when you use list pagination NETCONF protocol extension. So similar to the example in the list pagination mechanism job, actually you use a combination of all query parameter in the request and the response, and you can to get the interesting entry you really want to retrieve. Actually, use these query parameter as some constraint or as some filter. Next. So second job is a Rascon protocol extension. Next. So we introduce three protocol extensions. The first one is we add a list and leave list as a valid resource target for get. Actually, most of these this pagination focus on data retriever, focus on read the information, but also we actually allow this can be applied to the delete operation. So in the right, we give an example how to to delete the whole entry in the list using the delete operation. The second, we added new media type. We call the application /young-data plus xml-list. Last, we added 6 new parameters similar to the NETCONF protocol extension job. That's all. Next. So here we give the status update of this job. We have 3 jobs actually. So we can see the history of this job. We started from last year, November, actually in 112, we presented these 3 jobs actually on behalf of the design team. And we actually introduced the motivation, goal, and also solution. And also we design team discussed, found 2 open issues. And so we brought up for discussion. And later on, after IETF112, we actually try to close these 2 open issues. So raise the discussion on the list. One is focused on cursor support. So this cursor related to the index, and we come up with a solution. The second one is the remaining annotation. This also get discussed on the list, and we come up with a solution. And we get some feedback from Winning Napton from BBF, and we actually reach agreement on the change, what a solution looks like. And Also in February 10, in this year, actually, we confirm all the change, actually, and make sure we resolve these two open issues. So the chair actually helped to initiate the corporate adoption for this work. So we got quite a lot of review from Andy Choufeng and Ian and Tom Yugen. Balash. And also, actually, there are two issues actually discussed. One is related to the edit operation extension. Actually, this is most applied to the delete operation. So whether this should be in the scope. So it was suggest actually, say this can be addressed after working group adoption. After working group adopt this draft. The second one is really, we the NetConf actually has a lot of workload actually client server. So one of the suggestions is push back a little bit for adoption and before move forward and get a client server progress. Actually now actually we see the client server draft already address all the issues, and so this draft get adopted. So that's the current status. And we think that's all we have. We are very actually look for more comments and review on this work to help her to improve this work. And next. So comments, question?
Balazs.
Hello, my name is Balazs Dangel. I think this is interesting and important work, but I have a few comments. One, it is not required currently that a server keeps a stable order of sorting between times. So theoretically, every millisecond you could change the order of your list. You should address this. Okay. The second is that sorting is, in some cases, very complicated. If you think about sorting alphabetically, in some European languages, the O with two dots is after the simple O, sometimes it's after Z. Or how do you sort a string where some of the names are Chinese with Chinese characters, some of them are Europeans? The third is, how does this work if the XPath filters result in, let's say, two lists selected, not one single list, but two lists? Then, yeah, how does that work? Thank you.
Yeah, good comments, actually. Yeah, I think, yeah, we will try to come up with a solution. I think these are very good comments. Actually, we have the base work, actually. But the use case you raised, actually, you have two lists. That is complex case that we need to figure out how to address this. Yeah. Thank you for the comments.
So before John, you come on this mic, I just want a quick reminder, do contribute to the notes and the meeting page, especially if you're asking a question, it will help improve the notes. Continue.
Thanks. I'm John O'Brien. Thanks for doing this work. A couple of minor comments on the choice of keywords. I would suggest preferring keywords that are already going to be familiar to implementers and operators. Specifically, instead of sort by, I would suggest order by. And for the direction, I would suggest defaulting to ascending and descending. And I admit that I have mixed feelings about having alternate keywords that mean the same thing.
Yeah, thank you for raising these comments. Actually, in the design team, we actually back and forth to discuss what terminology will be appropriate. Actually, we do use, order by before, and also, for direction, actually use ascendant and descendant. But some design team member, actually, I remember correctly, is Per. Actually, he suggests we use some other terminology, but I think it's a good comment. We will see how to reach agreement on this. Thank you.
Robertson, Cisco as a contributor. So one thing I want to understand is the sort of performance impacts of this, where you do like a filter and then a sort, and then you return a subset of the data. Then when you get a subsequent request, is the server going to maintain any state for that, or will they have to effectively refilter, resort to get the next batch of data to return? Because certainly if you had a large list, that could be quite expensive to be doing that calculation many times.
Yeah.
So is that, I don't know, I haven't read the draft close enough to know if that's a potential issue or not. And again, I don't really know with databases with a cursor mechanism, whether they effectively, their cursors maintain that state to avoid that issue, but I don't know.
Yeah, we are struggling whether we should define this as a stable mechanism. So I think, yeah, we can think about that and see whether we need to cover this kind of case. How do you address this? Yeah, thank you.
Jeff Haas. So Balazs and Rob have both hit two of the points that I've talked about, which is the stability of the stored orders, especially if you're using an offset as the next entry. If the entries are constantly changing, that offset becomes meaningless the second time you come around to your display this thing. The usual workaround for this sort of problem is that you keep track of the last key displayed, and as long as you have a stable stored order, show me the entries that are after this as my cursor is the thing that generically works in most mechanisms. So you may wish to consider that. Somewhat towards Rob's point, a way to maybe choose to think about this is rather than having the queries run over and over again, an option, not a mandatory one, that you should consider is the ability to request a stable snapshot be taken for the data in question. So, and then you pass in some sort of identifier to resume a specific walk on a specific set of data. This way you can actually do the work once, maybe save it to a file temporarily, and you can resume your snapshot within that file.
Yeah.
The problem that you have with that is sometimes the data set is so large or there's not enough persistent storage available to do this sort of thing, so it can't be a mandatory thing.
Yeah, good comments. Yeah, thank you. We'll consider that.
Okay.
Yeah.
We don't have anybody else in the queue. So continue the discussion on the mailing list.
Thank
please.
you.
So with that, I think we can move to the non-chartered items. All right, go ahead, Jan.
Good morning. So we can flip to the next page. So I just wanted to give a brief update about this NetConf transaction ID work that has been going on here. Basically, there are two additions since last technical additions. One is about last modified transaction ID mechanism, something that we used to have in the draft works before I published it, that I removed in the end, but now I've added it back because of popular demand. And also some integration with Yang push, so that Yang push together with transaction ID both become better. And I will go through those 2 points on slides a little bit, but we can go to the next slide first. So most of the work in the O2 rev of this document has been to clarify and extend the text to be more clear about the concepts here. So I made a few changes of terms. I've added more clarification about the candidate data store. We have discussed or introduced better diagrams for the message flow and improved the examples. We've changed from IETF interfaces to IETF access control as an example, because some people found IETF interfaces to be confusing in this context. Provided a more specific list about XPaths to the places where these additional attributes can be found and can be added, just to make it easier and clearer. Next slide, please. So if you remember, I will just very briefly touch on what this transaction ID is about. Let's say one of the problems that we're trying to solve here is that when the client is getting the configuration from a server, sometimes it wants to get the full configuration, but sometimes it only wants to know if things have changed or not. So it would be convenient if we don't have to get the config and get it again and see, then try to compare and see, is this the same now or has things changed somewhere? And that could be done with this transaction ID. Next slide. Another problem, especially related to Yang push, is that if a client is pushing something to a server that it's interested in, and it might also be subscribing to Yang push notifications, it will hear updates of the same things it's just sent there in an edit config. So it will be a sort of echo. And it would be nice to be able to cancel those echoes. We don't want to process and treat all these updates. And there's also currently quite hard to know if I send an edit config to a server and get the Yang push communication back, it's hard to know if this is indeed the same as I just sent, or if it is some other client that did something that resembles my change, but it's not exactly the same thing. So with a transaction ID, this would help too. Next slide, please. And the third thing is that it's sometimes important for clients to be able to make changes and be guaranteed that nothing else has changed in between since last time. It's of course possible to take a lock, but that is not very, let's say, cooperative in an environment where there are many clients, that one client would take a lock for extended periods of time to prevent others from making changes is kind of not nice. So we don't want to prevent others from making changes, but we want to know when other clients are making changes, and transaction ID can help with that too. Next slide, please. So I will then this is the overall high-level description, but now I will dive down into the one detail, which is this last modified transaction ID mechanism, to show how that compares to the previous ETAG solution. Next slide, please. So here you can see on the left, colors went away. That was a pity, but okay. You can see here on the left, you have a particular get config message reply, where you can see that last modified attributes are in there. If you look closely, the colors went away now, so it's kind of hard to see, but it says TXID : last modified and some date stamp on several places in this content. So that is, and then you can compare with the right side, where you can see how it was in the previous, or with the other mechanism, with the transaction ID ETAG. It's basically a similar attribute, TXID : ETAG, with a sort of random string or identifying string of the change. So the only thing that is really difference between TXID last modified and TXID ETAG is that now we have a timestamp instead of some other string. But other than that, it looks much the same. Next slide, please. One detail, though, is that in RESTconf, there is already a sort of last modified mechanism. But that RESTconf, that is by RFC 8040, the RESTconf specification itself has this built in already. But the timestamp format in there is based on a date and a time with just 1 second resolution. So in the proposal I wrote here, I reused the same format for RESTconf, which is then without fractional seconds. That's nice in a way, because it aligns well with the rest of RESTconf, but it's not so good because it's quite conceivable that you can have more than one edit config change within the same second, and then this becomes ambiguous. So I'm on the fence here how we should do this. Should we keep using this existing RESTconf date stamp format, or should we add fractional seconds? In the document, the Rev2 document here now, it has the same as in RESTconf, but I'm not sure. I'm not convinced that that's the best choice. I'm not sure. Actually, I would like to ask the room, we can do that after the presentation here, but what's your opinion about this? Should we keep this low resolution and be aligned with RESTconf? Or should we do it with a higher resolution, just like we do for NetConf here? Next slide, please. And the other detail I wanted to show now is this integration with Yang push, just to show you very simply what that looks like. It actually is quite simple. So next slide, please. So here, colors went away. I don't know exactly what happened with them, but on the bottom, you can see on the left side here under push subscribe, you see near the bottom, IETF NetConf transaction ID YP with eTag true. That is how a Yang push user would enable transaction IDs for Yang pushes for this particular subscription. So it's just a simple leaf that is added to the subscription to get this functionality. And on the right side, in the updates, you can see right around the middle, you can see Yang patch ID 0, edit, and then it says transaction ID : eTag, and then it gives a particular name for this update. And that is how transaction IDs would be integrated with Yang push. So it's very unintrusive, small amounts of additional data that goes in there to enables us to identify all the changes where they're coming from, and that we already have this information in the client and so on. That was basically all I had, but I'm happy to answer any questions or comments. And in particular, if people have opinions about the resolutions of timestamps for the last modified thing, I'd be interested to hear.
Okay, Rob.
Rob Wilson, Cisco's contributor. So in terms of the resolution of the timestamps, one thing I wanted to understand is if you have a fractional timestamp, are you expecting every request to have a unique value? So you wanted to guarantee uniqueness on that?
That's right.
Okay.
A client that is asking for transaction ID would like to be able to compare that with previous IDs that it has. Is this the same or not? And with the 1 second resolution, there's potentially a risk that some things have changed, but it still has the same timestamp.
Balázs Daniel Eriksson, I think without allowing that two transactions in the same second have the same transaction ID according to the last modified, that's not acceptable. This makes this whole mechanism unreliable, defeats its purpose. So either you have to do something there. One is to have a detailed timestamp. And yes, having the order of the transactions, that's also a nice feature.
Yes, but in the RESTconf, I think some of this functionality is already defined by RFC 8040, like how you can retrieve information that is new since a particular timestamp. And that is not something that this particular draft that I'm working on here can change. So I think even if we, I'm not sure how useful this feature will be in RESTconf if you need that high resolution.
Okay, John.
Hi, John O'Brien, University of Pennsylvania. I have some sort of poorly formed or incompletely formed questions having to do with kind of what I already know from sequence numbers in DNS, which seem relevant to this use case, and things like boot time in SNMP, which also seems relevant, especially when we're talking about using a timestamp to determine whether something has changed. And the device for managing and the manager might not have good knowledge of whether the managed device has good time or whether the time, its idea of time has changed since the last time we asked it. Are those considerations that you feel like have been addressed by this draft?
Yes, the reason I did not include some sort of timestamp in the original version was concerns of this kind. I think time is a complicated concept, but I agreed to add it but then I only define one operation on these timestamps, and that's equality. There's no other operation that is valid.
Thanks.
Go ahead, Kent.
Peter. I'm thinking the timestamps are, maybe it's okay to use second level resolution, and for clients where it matters, they shouldn't use last modified. Instead, they just use the E tag, and that's what they do. And also, keep in mind that for things that are sub-second resolution, we're talking about configuration database mostly. The updates that, the optimistic locking. So it's with configuration, and configuration changing at sub-second resolution can happen in some scenarios, but it's probably not as common of a use case. So I think last modified has value for common use cases, and for those extreme use cases, they probably shouldn't use last modified.
Yes, I tend to agree. For some use cases, it may be convenient to have a small and simple mechanism. RESTconf is geared towards those kind of not so complicated use cases in many environments. So maybe there it has a value. But I agree, E tags should be used when things need to be strictly correct all the time.
Rob Wilson, Cisco. So any other thoughts, just in terms of what John was mentioning, is would it make sense to have like a logical timestamp here, so a counter rather than a timestamp, so something that's guaranteed to increment every time a configuration request comes in, a sequence number or something that would then guarantee that these are unique and ordered, if that was helpful.
We have the E tag mechanism, which I think is a more robust and secure mechanism for doing this sort of thing. And the reason that we added timestamp is because in RESTconf, there is already, in RFC 8040, there's like half of this mechanism is already defined there. So we just added what was missing with the transaction timestamp. So then it becomes a complete mechanism. But I agree that time may not be the best way of keeping track of when things have changed or not. So I think if you're concerned about keeping perfect track of this, you should use the E tag mechanism instead, which is a mandatory mechanism. Timestamp mechanism is only optional.
Okay, so it might be helpful if the draft was clear that the problems of doing the comparison of timestamps and basically gave some advice as to what not to use them for and push people towards the E tag, if that text isn't already in there.
Yeah, I tried to specify quite clearly that the only operation that is valid on these timestamps is testing for equality. But maybe, of course, we can add more text about why that is. But
All right. So I'm going to start a poll to say, oh, sorry, we have more.
Okay, hi, Charles Eckel, Cisco. Sorry for the delay. I wanted to let the stuff on the timestamp thing finish, because I just had another question about, in the case of two questions, actually. The first one was, the draft talks about, you send the E tag or whatever, and if there's been a relevant change, the server wouldn't return, would return some type of error. Rather than, the server does something different if there's a relevant change or a change that's of interest to the client or something like that. There was the wording like left some wiggle room as opposed to saying, if the E tags match, you do this. If they don't match, you do this. I was just wondering, was that just the way of describing it that left that wiggle room, or is there actually more than two cases of match and not match?
It would be good if you could point out the section that was unclear to you, so I can make sure that it's clear. But in essence, you're right. The only thing that we want to match here is the transaction IDs of the payload that the client sends down. But it also there is the case where there are, let's say, when condition that is changing that makes the server change the configuration in an area that is not related to the particular edit config request. I mean, it's related to, but it's not part of the edit config request, and that is also included. So perhaps that is what I was trying to say.
Okay. All right. And then the other thing was, in case the server can't, according to these new rules or the rules in this draft, in case the server can't make the change, there could be a couple of reasons. One could be that it was like the change that was being made just really didn't make sense, or that data doesn't exist, versus it's because of the E tag. And I didn't know if the error that the client would receive, does it distinguish between those cases, or do both cases look the same to the client?
No, there's a specific error message for that. It's you can find it in the document there. It's defined exactly what it should look like.
Okay, great, thanks.
Okay, if there are no more comments, Jan, I'm not sure if you're actually asking for workgroup adoption at this time. I didn't see a slide.
I don't know how to do that, but if you think the time is up, then please go ahead.
Okay.
The time is right, is what I want to say.
Okay. All right. So having cleared the deck of a large number of documents from the working group, maybe this would be a good time to ask the question, do you consider this work useful? And would you like to see this draft adopted as a workgroup item? So I'm going to start a poll and have you answer to that on Meet Echo. Okay, so the trend seems to be fairly positive. We will go ahead and send a formal notice on the mailing list to see if the work group wants to adopt the document as a work group item. Thanks, Jan.
Thank you.
Sorry. So I'm Huaimo Chen and present for the authors because they cannot attend the meeting. Next page. So for LightConf, we already so this is all the slides. I just so LightConf already use some of
close it to the mic.
LightConf already use security transport protocols such as a symbol object access protocol and secure cell and people extensible something. So most of these secure transport protocols is UDP based. Because of this, there are some shortcomings. For example, the head of line blocking in the TCP. So these shortcomings can be overcome if we use QUIC as a secure transport protocols. So in addition to overcome these shortcomings, the QUIC as a secure transport protocol have also some other advantages. For example, QUIC connection established is very quick. And also quick, they have authentication and the encryption for the header and the payload and so on. So that's why we propose use quick as a transport secure protocol. So here we just give some details about about the use the quick as secure transport protocols. So here we just talk about the connection management. First, we have a draft version identification. So basically, this consists of a token such as NOC, which is short for netconf over quick, and then plus some numbers, number 1 versus number 2, and so on. When we want to set up a connection, at first we need to negotiate the version numbers. So when both sides agreed or both sides support the common versions, then we can continue. So also, both sides should also consider the transport protocol, maybe the version is greater than 1.3 something. So after this stage, and then we can hook up, try to build connections. So basically here, when netconf connection is built over quick, the netconf manager will be the client of a quicker, and then netconf agent will be server. Also, the manager will initiate the connection. So this basically about the connection of netconf over quicker. And then we consider we shut down the connections. So in this case, first we have to review the ways quick terminate their connections. There are 3 ways for quicker to terminate the connections. One way is that the idle timeout is enabled. In this case, when idle timeout, and then quick will shut down the connections. So another way is that either side of the quicker, then they just send the connection closed. So in this case, the connection will close. And the third way is that, so something wrong happened, we cannot access some state, whatever, and then we just steadily reset the connections. That's the three way the quick connection will be terminated. So because netconf connection is over quick, so in this case, we will disable the idle time out in the quicker. So in this way, in normal case, the netconf connection will there forever. And then we just, when netconf entity receive or send a close session, so in this case, netconf entity will shut down the quick connections associated gracefully. So in another case is that, so when netconf entity receive or initiate the queue session, when session is open in open stage, and then in this case, the netconf entity will also gracefully shut down the quick connections. So the third case is that, and then when netconf connection detects something wrong in the quick or under, and then we shut down the connections. So that's the way, more consideration about netconf over quick connection termination. So next page. So here we just we'll talk about some more details about those connections. So in order to talk those more details, we just give the protocol layer of netconf. So basically, this is described by the RFC 6241. So netconf layers will have 4 layers: content layer, operational layer, message layer, and the secure transport layers. So here, basically, we just focus on the communications between the manager and the agent. So this connection or communication is RPC based. And then we have one type of connection or communication is bidirectional. For example, when manager send the configuration to agent, and then agent will after something, and then agent will send a notification to manager. So this is a two-way communication, or called bidirectional. So another communication is we can classify as unidirectional. For example, when agent find something wrong, or whatever, they just send a notification to the manager. So in this case, manager don't need to reply. So this is one directional or unidirectional. So for these two types of connections or communications, and then we can use the quickest stuff or mapping those two types of communications to the quickest strings very easily. So next page. So basically, this gives more details about, we have two type of communication or strings. One is bidirectional in NetConf. So this bidirectional communication can easily map to quick strings, string IDs, because in the quick string ID, there's the last two bits, and then those last two bits identify or indicate whether this string is unidirectional or bidirectional. So we can directly mapping the NetConf communication, different type of communications, to the quick strings identified by the last two bits of quick string IDs. So next page. So about authentications using a quick handshake. So basically, we just reuse some kind of procedures or whatever rules already defined. For example, for the server identity, we just reuse those rules already defined in the 4642 in that one. And then for the client side, client identity is local policy determined. And then we can also use third-party authentications. So let's look at details. Next page. So this basically, this is the description or rules defined by RFC 4642, which is how we identify a server. So basically, so client must use the server name. That server name is also used when we open the connections. And the second rule and the third rule, this one, I don't need to go repeat this one, because this one, all this is already described in RFC 4642. So next page. So if this proposal move forward, and then we will need some kind of IANA assignment. So here, one request is for the LPN registration. This new registration will be just we have a protocol, and then maybe we just use the NOC as a protocol ID, and then we just have this kind of a sequence there. And then we also need a UDP port number, because Quicker is based on UTP. So next page. So this is the first presentation. So we would like just to collect all the feedbacks or comments from all of you. But because I'm not the author, I don't have those details, and I would like you to send those questions to the list, because because I haven't spent much time around this one. I just spent the time to digest this draft and then present this draft. Thank you.
So before we have the first speaker come up, are the authors in the room, even if they're remote or virtual? And please step up there and help the presenter in answering some of the questions. Go ahead.
Thanks, Anthony Somerset, Liquid. Considering it's over Quick and it's over UDP and it's NetConf, I've got a few reservations because of, UDP is not like guaranteed reliable. Yes, Quick is better than plain UDP, but the bit I wasn't seeing, at least in the draft, was how we would necessarily get that reliability because of the config that we might be sending or receiving to ensure that it gets there. I haven't seen that, and I think we would need to address that.
Yeah, I think that's a good question. Whether a Quick can provide the same level of reliability as TCP, I think we can do some search or research. I don't know whether the author, I don't think the author is in the online right now. But Quick is a connection-oriented protocol. I think it should be reliable.
All right. So speaking as a contributor, if in summary, what I guess I'm gathering from your presentation or the presentation that you put forward is really the change is only the INA consideration page, or are there other protocol considerations that we need to think about?
Yeah, I think so, because this one, you see, we already have Quick there, and then we just how we use the NetConf over Quick is just how we reuse the Quick stuff. I think it looks like a pretty straightforward. And then we just request some kind of code numbers there.
Rob?
So Rob Wilson, Cisco, as a contributor. I'd like to say thank you for presenting, if you're not the author of the draft, and I thank the authors for bringing this work to the working group, because I think it's interesting and useful, and I think certainly something that's worth thinking about. I can see potentially NetConf over Quick could have some useful benefits, particularly in terms of the separate streams, but I'm not quite sure whether the way that Yangpush is set up today, whether you'd actually really see those benefits or not. And in terms of the separate streams for separate RPC requests, again, I'd imagine today a client would just open up separate sessions and you could coalesce those together and avoid that. But otherwise, often with the NetConf request, you'd expect them to be serialized, like an edit config request and then a get request. You expect those to be processed in order. And you might want to allow those to go in parallel, but there's other considerations there, which may mean that that's not the right thing to do. And if you do need to do that, having a separate session sort of solves that problem quite nicely. So another aspect to this is in terms of the startup time, I can see for some people that might be a little bit helpful. But again, in terms of the sort of exchange of capabilities and things, I'm not sure you'd see that much benefit. So later on, there might be discussion about where does NetConf go and where does Rascon go. I wonder whether Quick is better framed in that discussion, or like a future version of the protocols, rather than necessarily adding it to the current one, whether you'd actually get any real benefits over just using TLS and TCP.
Yeah, I think it's very valuable comments. And then also, I would ask the author to consider your suggestions and comments. Yeah, very good.
Thank you.
Yes, thank you everyone for the valuable comments and the suggestions. Okay.
All right. In light of the fact that I think, as Rob mentioned, maybe we might want to consider this as be part of Rascon next and NetConf next, we'll skip the hum on this draft. So the next presentation and the final one, actually not the final one, but the one is on TLS, NetConf and TLS 1.3.
Hi, my name is Sean Turner. It's nice to see all of your masked faces up here. All right, so NetConf over TLS 1.3, next. The motivation here really is that I deal with some very pedantic people and they read some drafts and they're like, well, that one says TLS 1.2, what about 1.3? I'm like, okay, so we can write a draft. Now, the thing about TLS 1.3 is that you can just kind of use it, but there's some differences that you need to deal with. The first is 0RTT. Now, what it says in the appendix of 8446 is that, like, in absence of an application layer protocol, you shouldn't use 0RTT, which is zero round trip. I think you guys know about this. It's in the Rascon draft. It's referred the whole 9 yards. But I kind of figured it's better to be explicit about this because people see this as the go fast button, and it's actually got some problems. And I'll get into that in a second. And I also like to stand on the shoulders of giants. Hold on. Sorry. And so what we decided to do was just base it off 7589. So we looked at the only two things that we needed to talk about to profile it, which were 0RTT and the cipher suites. And everything else says do what's in that draft. So it's a very simple draft. It's very short. We purposely decided not to update 7589 because I didn't want to get into the whole, you got to pick this one. This is the MTI over the other one. It's just kind of like, you can implement it. 1.2 is out there for now. I think it's going to be around for a while. But we did update the IANA registries to point to this draft in case you wanted to do it. So just kind of like dotting I's and crossing T's. So next. So the next, the big thing was 0RTT. So if you don't know about it, it's a way that allows you to send early data to clients or to the server in the first flight. Now, the way this works is you basically go back to the server the second time, but in the first exchange, it's giving you a pre-shared key. And so then you can use that to basically protect the subsequent messages. And it does make things faster. It can be loaded via this exchange, or it can be loaded out of bands. There are some problems, of course, because the data is replayable. And so that can cause some problems. And again, the whole point is just to basically say, don't do it. Now, on the RESTconf draft, I think there's also some recommendations about not supporting 0RTT. This is just making it a little stronger. And then the only other thing you need to say about it in the draft is cipher suites. And the cipher suites are specified slightly differently, and the mandatory to implement are a little bit different. And they're all forward secure. So it kind of makes sense to kind of move up to the next level of more modern cryptography. And that's really all that's in the draft. And I'm asking for working group adoption.
All right, I don't see anyone in the queue, or maybe now.
Rob Wilton, Cisco. I think this is really helpful to do. So thank you for taking the time to do this and to explain it, because I think it's helpful for the world to sort of move more towards TLS 1.3. So, so I'm definitely very supportive of this.
Yeah, and again, so the way I was always thinking about this is we'd specify it, and if you were like, nope, we want to put it in this other document or the next version or whatever, great, the text is there, take it, do what you see, what you want to do with it. If you want to move it forward with it, that's great too.
All right, if there are no more comments, then we're going to do a quick hum on whether we want to adopt this document as a work group item.
Like that's like instant gratification. I can see it on the screen.
All right, I just went ahead and closed the poll. I think we have an overwhelming response, and we'll take it to the mailing list to confirm the adoption. Thanks, Sean.
Thank you.
All right, with that, the final item on the agenda was discussion on RESTconf and NetConf next.
slide so we have something to look at.
Sorry, Ken.
Sharing the title, the first slide of the chair slides, so there's something on the screen.
Sure. So Ken, do you want to kick off the discussion, or do you?
Yes, sure. Of course. Yes. So NetConf Next and ResConf Next, there are issue trackers in GitHub for each of these drafts. And of course, the thinking is of those issue trackers was to collect issues that we've discovered over time, and ultimately roll them into the next major versions of these protocols. And same time as this, we're also tracking issues in the NetMod working group on Yang. Yang Next is the issue tracker there. And many more issues have been filed on the Yang Next issue tracker. And it goes without saying that an update to Yang would necessitate an update to NetConf and ResConf to support that next version of Yang. And so I guess the conversation is, do we want to, when does the working group think that we might have appetite for some of this work? Are there, are we beginning to feel like the protocols are getting old and we need to freshen them sooner rather than later? I guess we're just curious as to what people are thinking along these lines.
All right. Any comments on whether there's interest in the work group to see whether the protocols, both ResConf and NetConf, need a refresh? Rob?
So as the chairs will know, when we discussed this before the meeting, I was quite keen to have this discussion and see if there's feedback from the working group about this sort of topic. So some of the things that I think are interesting, quick that was just presented, is one option of something that's interesting. The other choices is in terms of NetConf being XML based, whereas a lot of the world's moving towards JSON or binary encodings. Is that something we want to consider and potentially updating the protocols for? I think there's other areas of where things like we have the shared candidate data store. Do we want to be trying to move away from that and moving towards like private candidate data source, that sort of thing? And there's other places in NetConf where I think that the specification is a bit ambiguous and could certainly be clarified or simplified in places as well. So I think there is, personally, I think there's scope to do something here if there's an appetite within the working group to try and actually drive this forward. The obvious question that Kent raised was about the dovetail with Yang Next, and do we need to wait for that or do that at the same time, which might take quite a long time. I'm not sure the two necessarily need to go hand in hand, but in the previous discussions, there is some work about moving some of the, almost like the protocol stuff that's documented in RFC 7950, potentially moving that out. So there is some sort of cleanup work that could also be done at the same time. So I'm interested in other people's thoughts on this matter, if there's anyone's willing to share them. Thank you.
Jeff
has. The thing that I would be interested in seeing, not being somebody that's strongly following the NetConf work, but is sort of soaking in the streaming telemetry work in a couple of different forms right now, is, again, as Rob's saying, get away from the XMLs, the tool that everybody likes to use, get into something that's more of a compact binary form. The phrase I sort of sling around work these days is that printf and scanf are not your friends. The cost of those, in terms of serializing stuff and deserializing them, wastes a huge amount of time. It wastes a bunch of space. Things like IP addresses, as an example, just the work to get that in and out of that format for a large amount of data. It's a waste of CPU. It'd be nice to see something, as an example, CBOR being used where we have a compact format, nice canonicalizations, and it serializes into a nice small form. I think the interesting question I'd have, again, being sort of a couple steps removed participant is, what happens to Yang as an example? Yang very much does its types right now based off regular expressions and the actual ASCII patterns that you print things as. What happens if you want to say, well, this node is an type IP address, but you want it to actually show up on the wire in binary format? What does that do to your validators? That sort of question.
So, Jeff, since you, again, speaking as a contributor, since you mentioned binary encoding, there is an issue open on the issues page. If you could add your comments to that, that would be helpful. The quick protocol is also an issue open on the issues page. So as Rob mentioned, maybe we should discuss that as part of revving the protocol. Some of the other areas that we are looking at and also are documented as issues on the page relate to a private candidate data store issue that I think Rob just entered a couple of days ago. There's some NACM integration improvement requests that Andy has indicated. And of course, there's the JSON encoding support in NetConf, which we might have to think in light of the fact whether we want to move towards a more binary encoded format or whether we want to support JSON. The cleanup of the specification relative to Yang and XML, I think this was referred to by Rob again with respect to RFC 7950. Where probably there are more references to NetConf that probably should be taken out of that document. So overall, quite a few issues. The question is of how much interest there is within the working group to pursue this work. So Kent, do you think it would be helpful to try to get a poll on whether there's enough interest, and then obviously who, if anyone, is interested in picking up some of the work?
I think a poll would be good, but before getting to that, with regards to binary, I'm almost wondering if it's something that we need to do, at least in terms of there's CoAP and CBOR already. They were created as effectively binary versions of NetConf or ResConf. Does it make sense for NetConf working group to define another binary protocol, or would that be the answer? I can understand fixing many of the other issues and moving to JSON and things like that, but for the binary, is that something that we think we should do here?
I think we saw a few nodding of heads as far as CBOR is concerned, right? Maybe Rob.
Yes, just for clarity, I think that CoAP aims to be really concise in things in terms of its format and things. I wasn't necessarily thinking that all the messages had to be necessarily defined in a binary format, but merely that the data that's being carried in like CBOR rather than XML or JSON. And in particular, my interest is in like the streaming telemetry side of things. We're getting data off the device, a lot of the data there. I think there's definitely benefits to having that go in a binary format.
Go ahead.
Paolo Lucente, entity. I would echo the CBOR, what we said about CBOR. And if at the same time we can distance ourselves as much as possible from Google Protobuf, that would be fantastic.
So Rob mentioned the stronger desire for when pushing telemetry data off box, and with the Notif, the suite of Notif drafts that were planning to publish. So far, there's HTTPS notif and UDP notif, and it was discussed at the time that we started creating these drafts that it would be ideal to create a binary notif of some sort, for pushing telemetry data or Yang push data. If that were the only focus, if it was just the binary notif, would that resolve like 80% or more of the primary concern for wanting to move to binary?
Jeff has. So Kent, the answer to your question is it shouldn't matter if it's the notification case or whether it's the normal cases. You're going to want the protocols to be able to deal with the same binary format regardless of which what it's being used for. But for the streaming telemetry, it's absolutely one of the core use cases, I think. Effectively because operations like gets for simple operational things, for small tables, it doesn't really matter what the encoding is. It's a small amount of data. You don't burn a lot of CPU. But any case where you have large amounts of data coming out, like say doing a get for the BGP rib, that's a huge amount of data. Being able to minimize that time would be good. And if you have a streaming feed of like BGP routing state as an example, minimizing that's also a core use case. So I think to answer your question, it doesn't really matter which is your use case. The telemetry feed will be sort of more of a motivating use case, I think, but it should apply across the board. It's common code.
Well, just to respond to that, I think it might be a great simplification if we can just focus on a binary notif format, because as mentioned, there's, for instance, UDP notif, right? So it's a completely different protocol, but it doesn't affect the configuration side of things. I understand that through NetConf, a client can, interactively request for the BGP rib data, and it would be a huge XML or JSON response. But if we have binary notif and the client is using Yang push, then that's how they would resolve that issue. So I don't know. I think it warrants more discussion. Thank you.
Just as a quick follow-up, if you think about printing any large XML document, how much of the overhead is just simply the tags? And that's the single biggest thing that you get out of any of the binary formats. Those things just drop out.
Mahesh, did you want to prepare a poll?
Right. So before actually we jump into poll, there's one other topic I briefly wanted to touch upon. Is so one of the issues that we opened some time ago was around the cleanup of hello message and capability in NetConf. Now, tied to that is actually the work of Yang library and I think the Yang the versioning scheme mechanism. I don't know if we have the authors here, but was there any desire to see that maybe the fellow exchange work is something that needs cleanup, or the fact that we want to use Yang library as a way to improve what is exchanged at hello time?
I'll let Jan speak to this first and then I'll come in.
Jan, you might want to unmute your microphone. We can't hear you. Okay, we still have a few microphone issues. Can you try speaking again?
No.
Okay, you might just put some comment on in the queue.
Yeah, or type it in the chat window.
Sorry.
So while Jan's doing that, Rob Wilson, Cisco. So we certainly discussed this in the context of Yang packages and the versioning work. So it's a good thing to raise this. And I know that Jan is concerned that we seem to have lots of different mechanisms for exchanging things like Yang library data and which models are being supported. And there's different other cases where you sort of exchange these lists of models. The idea with Yang packages, it sort of simplifies that and it stops you having to exchange these long list of Yang modules. You can just exchange a reference to that, but it does become another mechanism. So I think that yes, if we were doing a new version of the protocol and Yang packages was completed in that time, it would make sense to try and use that as the mechanism to say, this is the supported schema for the device, and try and simplify some of those mechanisms. So I think that would be useful and sort of cut back on the proliferation. I don't know if that agrees with what Jan thinks.
Okay, so before we go to the poll, any more comments or questions? All right, Thomas.
Thomas from Swisscom, maybe regarding the notification message header, a suggestion that we are adding also the XPath, the Yang model and the versioning aspect there. So if you're talking to make it binary, that would be very helpful.
Okay. Just make sure you add it to the notes page also. So I'll go ahead and start the poll. Okay, let's go ahead and I'll end the session. Benoit?
Thanks, Mahesh. So Benoit Claes, answer yes, right? But actually, I'm not interested in everything. So I'm interested into, you know, the binary encoding and the header and some of these. So I was not too sure what to answer. So I said yes.
Well, I also think that these issues could be handled one by one, as opposed to Yang, where we have big issues that need a second revision. I see this as more as additions than a revamp of the system.
Okay, so just quickly going back to the poll, even though it was generic and applied to almost all the open issues, we still had a fairly positive response. So the question, I think, which is being raised is, are there more specific hot button issues that need to be addressed before others? And that's something I think we can take as a poll also on the mailing list. We could certainly try to go through a poll process, but may not get a sense. So maybe Kent and I will discuss this and bring it forth in the workgroup mailing list to see if there are any specific issues that we may want to address before others. Kent, what do you think?
And I was actually, I have to come clean. I did not reply to that poll. I didn't know how to either. I guess really I was thinking the poll is, you know, do we start the work now, or, you know, if we know that the Yang next is looming and it's necessitating a change in netconf and resconf already, do we have to block for the Yang next work to complete, or move forward? And I guess your proposal is, let's see if we can find some items to move forward now, which makes sense. And of course, anyone is welcome to write a draft to move any of those items forward when possible. That'd be great.
Rob.
Rob Wilton, Cisco. So there were some poll votes against doing this work. It would be interesting for those people if they have a chance to either put a comment in the chat or come up to the mic and explain why they think we shouldn't be doing this. That would be really helpful, I think. I don't know if that aligns to Balazs's comments maybe in terms of being able to split the work up, but if there's anyone that wants to share their thoughts as to why we shouldn't be doing that, that'd be useful to hear.
Good point, Rob. So for those who did not raise their hand, either because they were confused about the question or did have specific views on why maybe the work should not be pursued, would love to hear from you too. Okay, so I see a comment from Jan who says there are currently 3 mechanisms defined for clients to figure out which modules a server supports. Then he goes on to say, I think a couple of the next issues might be worth working on. Is that a yes or a no? Maybe a poll for individual proposals might be more interesting than a yes/no global answer. So he was one of the ones who did not raise his hands. All right, unless there are any more comments, we can go ahead and close the session. We will take this to the mailing list, the question of whether we are in any way tied to Yang Next, should we wait for it, or maybe pick up some of the items, more hot button issues as what we want to start our work off with. So, all right, if there's nothing else, thanks everyone for attending the session, and hope to see you guys soon.
Yeah,